Bye.
Okay.
Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are joining us from. We're going to give everybody just a minute to get on and be with us. And it's good to see some new faces and some familiar faces and some decorations in the background. That's happening too. Oh, and palm trees. That's nice. I'm in Maryland. It snowed, so we'll go with that. I do want to say welcome and thank you for being with us today. My name's Eleni and I'll be moderating today's program of Let's Talk Live. We're continuing our digital series and we're glad that you could be with us today. We do love hearing from so many of you and we welcome you to continue to share your stories that you have about your faith over fear, especially during this time of crisis and things that we're in. It's always interesting to hear stories, especially now that we're in the nativity season. Just some reminders, please do be respectful and polite of others. This program is being recorded and it will be shared on OCTV on YouTube. We ask that you remain muted when you're not speaking. You are welcome to tell everybody where you're joining us from. Use the side chat bar, say, I'm so-and-so from this area. It's very helpful to know. You might be surprised that there's more Orthodox Christians. Everyone's waving to each other. I love that. And that's a nice thing that we have across the world. OCN is a 501c3. We're 100% donor supported ministry. And we continue to be an anchor for the Orthodox world for over the past 25 years. We are offering free streaming through the Rudder. Right now it's specific to the nativity season, so you can feel free to use that and play it in the background. A lot of people are enjoying that during the season as well. And with that, let me turn things over to Father Chris.
Thank you, Lenny, and welcome everyone to our program today, this evening, depending on, of course, where you're joining it from. The MyOCN community began, as you know, with Let's Talk Live. During the pandemic in March, when things started to get really bad, we realized that we needed to come together. And our board of directors, as well as our staff, decided to launch this program. We're launching it in our 25th year of broadcasting, which is amazing. We began it back in a little room in St. Demetrius Church in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and now flourished into something that literally reaches close to 1 million people per month. We have a campaign going on right now to raise $150,000 by the end of the year. I'm very pleased to tell you that we're at 90% of that goal. So if you feel you have the desire to give to this ministry, I'll ask you to please do that now, or you can do that at some point during the program or even after the program, and invite your friends to do as well. Let's begin with a prayer. I want to read the Politikion, the feast day hymn of the Nativity. As you know, those of you that are with us, I always have my Estel candle with me, as well as this evening, the icon of Christ and the Panagia. Your birth, O Christ our God, dawned the light of knowledge upon this earth. And by your birth, those who adored stars were taught by a star to worship you, the Son of Justice, and to know you, Orient from on high. O Lord, glory be unto you. As we continue our discussion of the document Toward a Social Ethos, which was commissioned by His All Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew and published by the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, this week we'll focus our discussion on 5 paragraphs, 34 to 38, which deal with the themes of poverty, wealth, and social justice. Perhaps as many other sections of this text, this paragraph's critique of the state of contemporary society and a call upon Orthodox Christians to put their faith into action in tangible and specific ways that will address unsustainable inequality that separates the rich from the poor. Tonight, we've asked 2 very special individuals to join us. Dr. George Demacopoulos is the Father John Meyendorff and Patterson Family Chair of Orthodox Christian Studies at Fordham University. His research and teachings interests are in early Christian and medieval church history. He is an archon of the Ecumenical Patriarch and one of the authors of the document. Reverend Dr. Marty Johnson, Jr., is the Chief Operation Officer at the Neighborhood Resilience Project located in Pittsburgh, PA. He ministers as the rector of St. Anthony's Antiochian Orthodox Church in Butler, PA. He is a crisis counselor, suicide prevention and response instructor, and a facilitator for the outpatient cognitive intervention. Boy, That's two very special individuals, and I've only given you the tip of the iceberg. Please go to our website to learn more about them. Let me start off with you, George. Welcome to the program. Tell us a little bit about your experience as one of the authors of the document.
Thank you, Father Chris, for the invitation to join you. Let me commend you just on the fabulous work with the network. You guys have been doing it for so long. It's so important. It's such an important ministry, especially in a situation like this where we can't go to churches, we can't go to events and hear things. Continuing this online is so important. I was really flattered and surprised, frankly, to be included. I'm really a historian, not an ethicist, not a theologian. I'm a historian of theologies, so to speak. And I was invited, along with more than a dozen other scholars from around the world, to sort of we were invited by His All Holiness, the Ecumenical Patriarch, to put together a series of reflections, directives, not instructions, not dogma, but directives about the way that Christians should put their faith into action, right? The document is very purposefully called Toward a Social Ethos. Right. It doesn't claim to be the social ethos. It's a document designed to spur people to think about what living in society means. So anyway, so I was part of this task force, men, women, mostly scholars, many priests as well. One who became a bishop in the time being of preparing it. His Eminence Metropolitan Nathaniel. Yeah.
This was a 2-year period, correct?
It seems like it was even longer than that. So this was several years ago. And so we met for multiple years, and we put together a draft collectively, each with our own kind of contributions, and always in teams of people.
Okay.
And then from there, and you know, obviously Father John Chrysophies was the one who really steered and directed this, especially sort of corralling the scholars, which I know you have experience with this. Corralling scholars is like herding cats, right? Everybody wants to go in their own direction.
Yes.
And everyone's used to being the expert. So, right.
All right. Well,
this was a difficult task, I think. But anyway, so we put forward a document that then went to a series of levels of review far above our pay grade, right? Mm-hmm. It went to the FNAR, it went to, they shopped it out to many different Episcopal reviewers, and they got a lot of feedback, and there was adjustments and so forth. And so the document that we have is this kind of work in progress, this kind of culmination of years and years worth of work. That began with a lot of scholarly voices, but ultimately had a lot of Episcopal and clerical insight as well. And so that's where the document comes from. You know, on our themes tonight, wealth and poverty and injustice and so forth. I mean, there might be no, as you said at the outset, there might be nothing else in the document that speaks as almost provocatively and directly about the responsibility of the Christian, of the Orthodox Christian, to be engaged in the world, not to retreat from the world, not to run away from the world, right. not to just ignore the people you disagree with, but to be actively, empathetically engaged with everyone.
All right, let's talk about then, how does the Orthodox Church speak to those who are blessed as the poor in spirit, with education, oculation to many ways of the world? George, I'll stay with you, and then Father Martin, I'm going to come to you for some of the quotes that I know that are in the document that we can deal with.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of different things that we can do here. Obviously, it requires preaching from the pulpit. Obviously, it requires, I think the issues of inequality need to be addressed on multiple levels. And I'd be really interested to hear what Father Martin has to say about this, because he has such expertise with it. But to my mind, it has to take place kind of at a parish level. It has to take place at a household level, Right. It has to take place at a diocesan level. It has to take place at a kind of structural institutional church level. In other words, because I mean, Christ engaged with the poor, spoke for the poor, advocated for the poor, perhaps more than anything else that he actively did. And if we are going to follow in his footsteps, then it has to be more than just cutting a check, right? It has to be more than putting a few extra dollars in the tray, right? It has to, as somebody like Al Rabito would say, it has to actually become part of who we are, right? And to really, as Father Martin does, to really get into the thick of things.
Okay. Father Martin, let me come to you. And again, it's great to have you on the program. There's a quote here: condemn current social conditions. Above all, the church can no less be concerned for the plight of the poor and defenseless than Christ himself, and no less ready to speak for them when their voices cannot be heard. I know you deal with people on a day-to-day basis on the street. Talk to us about this quote and maybe your experiences as well.
Yeah, I think it's an incredible statement in this document. And first of all, thank you for having me on the program this evening. Good to see you, Father Chris, by the way.
To see you too.
Me to you. But I think that the statement really speaks to exactly what we were given to read and sort of reflect on last weekend in the Divine Liturgy, which is to say, if we're going to be invited to the banquet of salvation as an Orthodox Christian, what excuse would we give not to go to that banquet? And the real danger here is, if we see inequality, we really do have to determine what we could do about it. And what I mean there is, even here at Neighborhood Resilience, where a lot of folks come for all kinds of reasons, the work is to see if that person could find a voice, their own voice, use that voice to be a better person and interact differently and better with others in the world. In other words, if we can change ourselves and change help another person change on their own, then by definition, the world changes. And so with that, I think we are called as Orthodox to bear fruit and be ready to not necessarily speak for someone, but empower, educate, and help someone both find their own voice and then have the courage to speak from that voice. And so indeed, both are true. For those that cannot speak or their voice has been taken, there is a call for us. And the second is, which I think is an even larger call, which is what's going on here at Neighborhood Resilience, hence resilience, is to help someone find their own voice and also speak from their soul and from their life. And so that is not a small statement in section 34 of this document. It's not small at all. That is one of the calls that Christ has for all of us, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And tell us just a moment about this Project Resilience that you're involved in. What do you do there?
So the Neighborhood Resilience Project is a nonprofit, it's Orthodox, and essentially it's an organization that takes a trauma-informed approach to helping people become better, take responsibility for their lives, and become resilient in a world that is unfair, that can be unfair. And it's a place where we can look at helping people lead themselves, empowering people to learn how to be a better person, and to give the strength of resilience so that the very teachings we have in the faith, which are, to oversimplify, if you get knocked down, to somehow stand back up. Well, it's one thing to say that. It's another to say, here's what we need to talk about for you to be able to do that. And I think it's no secret to us, being knocked down is what happens in life. And the sacramental life is going to include a few knockdowns and a fair amount of sacrifice. True. So resilience is the power to say, here's how you can be resilient, and look at the person holistically. Health, their community, and then all the things they need to be an empowered person and a resilient person right here, right now, in this life, on this earth.
Okay. Well, Eleni, I want to encourage our listeners and viewers here to also post any questions they have. So when we come to that part of the program, we'll be able to go to them. You can either open your camera and ask the question yourself, or Eleni or I can ask it for you. George, let me come back to you. There's something very, very, very strong. Again, it's at the end of that particular quote. The church is required to have the same courage as Christ, who left both his peace as the positive faith in the truth to speak to issues such as these. Can you talk to that for us?
Yeah, so I think this goes at a couple levels, right? On the one hand, I think what the kind of document is trying to do here is I think it's speaking to individual pastors, right? It's no secret that since the second century, pastors have been saddled with the responsibility of fundraising, right? And they can be put in difficult situations with respect to just how hard are they going to lean on their hardest benefactors, the people with the greatest resources, when it comes to speaking truth to power, right? If you have a situation like in the 4th century where Saint Basil is absolutely deriding the wealthy people in his parish because they are failing to take care of the poor that are literally standing right in front of them. I mean, Basil's a saint because he does this sort of thing, right? It's a little different if you're a priest and you've got kids and you don't want to get kicked out of your parish, and right. And so on the one hand, I think that the document is trying to embolden ministers with their the people that are right in front of them with speaking to these sorts of issues. At another level, at a completely different level, I think that the church is, I think the document is saying something about church leaders, the institution, with respect to speaking out on political issues, right? Speaking out on refugees, speaking out on just destructive inequality and so forth. I mean, we typically don't have a shortage of Orthodox clerics showing up for the March for Life, and I'm thankful for that, right? But we do sometimes find ourselves with a shortage of priests willing to speak to issues of social justice, wealth disparity, and so forth. And so I think the document is urging the church to get engaged in the messiness and so forth.
All right. Well, I remember very clearly Dr. Al Rossi, whom you both know. He's been a frequent guest of ours, and he always said, you won't know the person until you look them in the pupil of their eye. And that is the case when I will share with you when we went with our Goya, our Greek Orthodox Youth of America, in our parish in Fort Lauderdale. I remember going to one of the homeless shelters and the feeding center. And we worked in that room with the people that were just the volunteers, cooking meals, preparing the meals, carrying them to the people, giving them water to drink. And the kids were doing it without any hesitation. And the adults were like, oh, what is this? Oh, I can't believe it. They smelled. They hadn't washed, bathed, God knows how long. Probably some of them had eaten. They'd never been to a dentist. They were in very bad shape. And I bring that up. Why? Because the youth are able to see it because of the innocence. We who are a little bit older have become a bit jaded through life. And I think the pandemic, whether it has been horrific with over 300,000 deaths, but on the other hand, it has given us a chance to reflect on who we are and those who are less fortunate than we are. So we've seen this huge upturn now, at least I've seen it, of these food banks all over the country with lines with cars, thousands of cars in line. and they're there giving food constantly to people. So let's talk about the church, if you will, in action. What is it that we specifically as a church now can do? We're dealing with the inequality, tax policies, fair wages, political action, things that we don't like to really deal with. But let's talk about that a little bit. Father Martin, let me come to you, and then I'll go back to George.
Yeah, I think the church absolutely needs to be in the square and in the discussion. And I want to bring up a couple thoughts about that. The first is there is a vacuum out there, and anything will fill it. Conspiracy theories on the internet will fill that vacuum if you don't say something. The party you don't like in this country will fill the vacuum. Somebody's going to fill the space. And so I think we as the Orthodox Church can fill it. Let me give you a quick example. There are lots of third rails and lightning rods in US society now. Here's one, here's an old one. Do you remember, and I will never forget this, the football player, Kaepernick? How about even that name? Even that name is a lightning bolt. And so here's where I want to go. When Nike made the commercial for him, he surrenders his career. He says, "I think this is wrong," and he gets all the stuff 4 years ago. In that commercial for Nike, here's what it says: "Be willing to sacrifice everything to gain something for someone else." Okay, that's the gospel. And who's now saying it? Nike. Now, wait a minute. First of all, we see that in a whole other way. We see Nika too. Wait a minute. What I just mean is Nike now has a commercial, and he's now the voice for all sorts of people where he says, be willing to sacrifice everything. And what did he do? He surrendered his career on behalf of someone else. And I thought in that moment, he filled a space that, God help us, where we should be. And I think that idea, if I want to take it from there and just kind of speak to the idea that we're supposed to be in that space. This is a generation of Generation Z, millennials, and so many others. And there's one thing I know you've probably experienced it in your parishes. I know I certainly do. And I'm a retired Navy chaplain, so I'm used to young kids, 20s, 30s. The reality is, if you are not authentic and doing what you're preaching, they will hold that metric up against you very quickly. And I think the church has to enter the square for not only conversations about politics, which we know a lot about too. And I want to say to that, who's been around longer? Somebody name a government that's been around longer than the Orthodox Church. Exactly. So we do have something to say. We've said it for 2,000 years. We'll continue to say it no matter how many governments come and go, no matter how many economic systems come and go. And so I don't think we should be surrendering our place. I think this document is right down the fairway, makes a lot of sense on how to move our theology to praxis and to say, and this is the time, because right now, a pandemic has illuminated a really big deal, and that is inequality. Let me give you another example. Somehow, the people who work at our fast food restaurants were determined as essential, because everything in the United States, you could go out as long as it was a drive-through or a grab and go, you could go.
Right.
So suddenly a person who makes $12 an hour is continuing to go to work, and that amount of money really can't hold up their rent. The person that's more educated, let's say, not that people that do have those type of jobs are not, but those who have computer skills, worked in an office, and I don't know, finished high school or college, suddenly they can be remote in their homes, their pay doesn't change. And so You're right that, Father Chris, you're right that the pandemic exposed something. It exposed that the least of us are holding up a fair amount of the middle and the top. And they, of all of us, are the hardest, will feel this the hardest, and will continue to do so. My last thought for that. My last thought is,
sure, go ahead.
Right now, most kids in the United States and around the world are online. How many of you can be an online college student or high school student? Do you know what kind of discipline it takes to be an online student?
Very difficult.
And so let's think about this. 2021 will come. And when it does, and we can all somehow return to what normal was, we're going to learn an awful lot about what happens to elementary school kids who need a recess and need time. We're going to find out what happened with children and others relegated to online learning, with school systems who didn't have computers, with parents who don't know how to help them, with all sorts of things. Again, the pandemic exposing both the inequality of treatment, inequality of work, inequality of access, inequality of education.
No, very good points. Very good points. George, let me come back to you. Did you want to add anything to what Father Martin said?
Yeah, first of all, I absolutely love Father's Nike analogy, right? I mean, there is something so uniquely American about the fact that they were able to monetize a theme from the gospel, right? And to do it, you know, historically, I don't know what the current situation at Nike is, but historically with basically slave child labor overseas, right? Making their products. I mean, it just, there could be no better example of the inequality in the world, right? And precisely your point, Father Martin, that if there is a void, someone will fill it. And the message of the gospel is true, right? It's just so crazy that it can be monetized in such a way. I also agree that the current pandemic really does expose the inequalities in all the ways he's talking about. And you know what this document is trying to do, and we talked about this many times when we met, is that I think some of the reluctance for people can simply be the fact that for whatever reason, whatever personal spiritual trauma or personal trauma they have in their background or whatever ideology they embrace, it can be hard to see the poor person, the mentally ill who's living on the street, right? The person who hasn't shaven, hasn't bathed, who smells, who's urinated on himself, right? Who doesn't, or even if they're not living on the street, simply people, even the working poor, right? It's hard for someone with even moderate means to look at that person and accept that God loves them absolutely as much as he loves me.
Yeah.
Right? We have the exact same problem on issues of immigration, right? And refugees. These are, we dehumanize them, right? Through a series of processes. We dehumanize them because we don't want to come to terms with the fact that these people are just as human as we are. They are equally created and sustained in the image of God as we are, right? And it's because of our inability to do that, that we have inequality, right? I mean, if we genuinely believed in the gospel, right? That these people living on the street or these people without the things that they need for basic sustenance were just as loved by God as we were, then it would completely recalibrate our understanding of the things that God has given us and our responsibility about what to do with it.
Okay. Those are very, very good points. I mean, a couple of things that really come out in both what you're saying is, one, to be relevant, that the church must be relevant, which means it must be truthful. And the other, what Father Martin is saying too, is we got to walk the talk. And many times we don't. And I think it comes partially from fear, partially from selfishness, and partially because we've never had to do it. And we have a tendency to want to take care of ourselves first and then everyone else. And I understand that. Now, before we go to speak about how the church can speak with passion and with persistence in a prophetic voice to humanity beyond the sermons that some of us give every weekend, I'd like to go to our listeners and our viewers and Eleni and see if we have any questions. We've got plenty more for George and for Father Martin.
Sure, we do. I'll go ahead and ask it, but if somebody wanted to ask their question, did you want to ask your question, Marilyn?
Ooh.
Oh, yeah, if you read this chapter or this section, it comes across in contemporary political terms as very progressive, which unfortunately has become a divisive word in our society. And I'm wondering how the church can navigate this to depoliticize this and just keep it on the gospel, so that we don't have a right and left wing view of what the wonderful words are and ideas are in this about poverty and wealth and inequality and social justice.
Yeah, before I go to our guests, I want to share, there was a commentator once on television, and he was asked some really bizarre questions about progressiveness and all that. And he said, look, he said, I believe in the Gospels. I believe in the writings of Paul. And until the Lord takes that gospel and the writings back up to heaven, rewrites it and ships it down, I'm going to follow what's there. So we know what we're supposed to do, but we don't do it. Now, George, Martin, Father Martin, either of you can, Marilyn, that's tremendous points.
I'll jump in if I can, Father. Marilyn, it's a fabulous observation, and you're absolutely right that things can become politicized. I teach at a Catholic university, a Jesuit university, and they're really into issues of social justice, right? Which is, been part of the parlance for the last several decades. And, because I'm a historian of the early church, I, of course, like to remind everyone that social justice was not invented in the 1960s. Social justice was actually invented by the Cappadocians and John Chrysostom.
There you go.
And so I think the way that we can, one way to depoliticize this, or to not make it advocacy for one political party or critique of another, is to speak with a historical frame of reference, right? To simply read the words of John Chrysostom publicly, right? When he's railing against the unwillingness to feed the beggar, right? Or the unwillingness to take in refugees, to make it as a parish, group reading, a series of sermons by Saint Basil the Great in the time of famine called "I Will Tear Down My Barns." Right, it's a reference to the gospel passage, right? Or to read Saint Gregory Nazianzen's 14th oration, right? In other words, you have 20-page documents written by some of the greatest theological minds of all time, who speak precisely to the issues that this document is trying to speak to, but did so 1,600 years ago before anyone ever knew what a Republican or a Democrat was, because they lived in an empire, right? So that would be my recommendation. But Father Martin lives in this more than I do, so I'd be interested to hear what he has.
No, that's George. I'm with you on that. That's absolutely right, Marilyn. You're asking the right question, and I honestly, that division and the politicization That's the very thing that we're also suffering at every parish in this country.
Yes, exactly.
With everyone. How on earth how on earth does an elephant and a donkey end up in the place where we worship the Lamb? How'd that happen? Okay, no. The Lamb is who's in our sanctuary. No elephants, no donkeys.
Love it.
And without that view, we're all in trouble. But realistically, I mean, George is making a reference to Luke, and absolutely, we know how the story goes, we would have to listen. You're an Orthodox Christian, and I'm an Orthodox Christian. We better get caught operating in the gospel. That's how we have to get caught. And so the greatest example there is, I mean, think about it, right? George made a reference to a great text. We know the story. It was a couple weeks ago. If the rich guy says, yeah, my barns are a little small, well, I'm rich, I'm going to make them bigger and put more stuff in them. And matter of fact, then he says to himself, hey, soul, let's drink and be merry. That is the story.
Yeah.
That's a story about wealth.
Yeah.
And well, how would we say that today? Father Chris is talking about relevance. Well, another way that somebody would hear that is, well, wow, what an interesting gospel story. Doesn't this person know that you can't take it with you?
Yeah.
Well, I have to say that the story of the donkey and the elephants and the lamb will probably be the refrigerator moment of our discussion this evening, because that slams it right between the eyes.
I know.
Eleni, do we have any other questions? You're welcome. Eleni, other questions?
We do have another question. Anna, I'm sorry, Marilyn was from Maryland, so I apologize for not asking you, Marilyn.
Okay.
And Anna is joining us from Salt Lake City. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much for putting this on. I am currently a student at Hellenic College Holy Cross, a part of their new certificate program in youth and young adult ministry and leadership, and I'll be participating as Crossroads staff in the summer.
Fabulous. I
am I don't know how to formulate this, but my senior year at Boston College, I wrote my senior thesis. This was about a year and a half ago, on a need for an Orthodox social doctrine. At that point, I didn't know that there was one in the process.
Yeah.
Found out about halfway through. My uncle was one of the people who worked on it. So I was able to discuss with him it as it was going on, but with a lot of secrecy and kind of under the table discussion, so to speak, because of how big the document was. So for me, it was a very important thing that I thought should have been happening, and was very glad when I heard that it was. Part of the reason why I chose to do this program was to work with Crossroad, especially in regards to the Love Your Neighbor portion. I spent the last year doing a year of service with the Jesuit Volunteer Corps in Baltimore, Maryland. And something that I found in the last year and a half is some kind of what was discussed earlier, but there is such a taboo about discussion around social justice issues or service or even charity and philanthropy in the Orthodox culture as well as the Greek culture. And I found a lot of pushback from not only adults, but also youth. So I kind of wanted to ask, now that this document has been published and is kind of being slowly rolled out, how do you think we go about bringing it into parishes and communities in a way that actually gets things done? I
That's
think
where we're going next.
Yeah, because something I found is that there's a desire to discuss, sometimes not even that often, but when I personally have brought up discussions about this, even in my classes at Holy Cross, there's a lot of pushback and a lot of, that's not that important, or, oh, that's too progressive, like the last question expressed. So I think especially considering that the future of our church and the young people are very socially minded, like how do you think that we go about addressing the fact that this document has been written and that this is what the Orthodox Church says? Like, how do we go about that next?
Okay, very good. No, that's good. That's good, Anna. And I want to tell you that the hope here with Father John Chrysovius is that this begins to become an adult study class. All of these now have been or will be on YouTube as a series. And the hope is that parishes who don't have the ability to gather together experts like we do for all of these issues will avail themselves of this and will begin to use it as discussion beginning points, not end points. But I'd like to hear from George, and then we'll go to Marty as well. I mean, the issue here is how do we become a prophetic voice? Look, people are going to come to church when the church is reopened. And they're either going to come to the church with their feet, or they're going to walk away from the church with their feet. Either we're going to become relevant to today's society, or we're not. And these generations, we're now in the 6th generation in America from an Orthodox Christian perspective. We are either going to become relevant or we're going to die on the vine, in my personal opinion. So I'd want to hear from George and Father Mar what they think as well. George?
Quickly, I mean, I wish it wasn't this way, but frankly, Anna, to answer your fabulous question, it's up to individual priests. They're either going to want to make this a part of what they do in their parish, or they're not. The one small sidestep to be, it could be up to like the high school Sunday school teachers, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the high school Sunday school teachers were made aware of this document, then you could structure an entire year of Sunday school lessons based on paragraphs of this document. Yeah. And you're right, Anna. Look, I see a lot of young adults your age, right? Obviously, I've been a professor for 20 years. And you are right that they are very socially active, right? They're very concerned about these things. They're very concerned about the environment, right? We haven't even touched upon the connection between environmental degradation and how it affects the poor disproportionately, right? It's like night and day, right? And it's true that not all young people are progressive or whatever, but they still care about these kinds of things. And I would love to see like a junior year of high school Sunday school curriculum revolve around a document like this, with a teacher that hopefully knows how to engage it, right? And generate discussion.
Okay, good. Father Martin, you want to jump in on that
real
too?
Quickly, Anna, I think you're asking the right question, which is how much of this could actually be implemented anywhere, anytime. And my thought there is, number one, once you've moved through the document, you would try to find one or two things that would make sense for your parish. In other words, as George said earlier, if you're in some parts of the country, they're going to say, we read the document, here's a check. And you're going to say, that's not what I mean. And then somebody else is going to say, I read the document. Do you want to start a soup kitchen? In other words, my thought is this document's, it's excellent in terms of looking at how the Gospels can inform what we would do for someone else. But that now becomes the thing that you have to choose 1, 2, maybe 3 things max that a church could do and support. So my thought is, I would find it difficult to believe that a parish couldn't find one thing in this document to represent how they're going to love the neighbor in the community where that parish finds itself. You can't tell me that there isn't 1 or 2 things in here, no matter how many views they have about what it is or what it proposes, that there's not one thing in there that would govern something we could do outside of ourselves. Then we end up back in last Sunday's sermon. Somebody's going to say, go out to the highways and byways and get somebody else to do it.
It's good points. I mean, when we began these series of Let's Talk Live programs. It was Eleni who came up with the idea of using the term faith over fear. And many, many times we respond to these issues. I hate this thing where we go into these talking points, or progressives or liberals or this or that. Yeah. I mean, the need of people, to reach out to people, to hold a person's hand, to give them water, to give them food, is not a progressive issue. It's a biblical issue. It's a Christ issue. Do this unto the least of these, you've done it to me. So clearly, we as a church have to do better, but we're not yet ready, I'm afraid, to take faith over fear. And that's where we fall short. I want to ask one final question of our guest this evening. It's gone by very quickly, and I'm sure the conversation will continue, which is what these are supposed to do. So, what role can the Orthodox Church play in the discussion of workers' rights, which we talked about, living wages, treatment of all people as it relates to the economies, to view people effectively, not as chattel, view commerce as the principal way of relating to one another via the secular perspectives, and are easily driven to be captured avarice and policies that protect it? I mean, these seems to be the crux of what we're at. George, let me come to you first.
Yeah, I don't think there's a single bullet answer to this. I think it really has to be a complete and comprehensive approach. It has to be, how do I, as a Christian, do it? It has to be, how do I raise my children and engage them in philanthropic life, right? What does my friend group? I attend a very large parish. I live on Long Island. What does my friend group at my very large parish do, and how do I prod them? What does my priest do? What does the Sunday school do? What does the youth group do? The more and more we make commit ourselves habitually to these kinds of issues, and not once a month when a tray is passed or whatever, but really, right, then it will filter up, and the clergy, and especially our hierarchs, will have, I think, greater confidence to use the megaphones that they have to speak more directly, not in a kind of Republican or Democrat kind of way. That's not what I'm advocating for at all, but advocating for specific policies that reflect a consistent ethic of life, right? Right, it's not enough to engage politically on abortion and think that you're done. Right. That you have to kind of advocate for a consistent, lifelong ethic of life that requires political action.
Father Marty?
Yeah, I agree. I think that it is at the individual level. Everyone here is in the royal priesthood. That means that you and I are called to be prophetic, called to be priest, and called to be king. And with that as the truth, hey, count on, if you think there's something going on as a royal priest who goes to the cup every Sunday for divine liturgy, and when you leave there and your liturgy begins when you leave church, you can count on plenty of people saying, that's not prophetic to me at all. Have a nice day. And so I think that everyone here is in the royal priesthood. Well, you're going to have to act from that place. And we're all going to go to the judgment seat of Christ. Every one of us. The question is what we will say when we left the liturgy and end up at that judgment seat. I would simply say that it has nothing to do with politics. There's something else you can't take with you. And so I think it's all about connecting the gospel. And then, as Father Chris said, faith versus fear, count on someone not seeing it as prophetic. I think in the last talk I gave to the Pittsburgh Greek Archdiocese, it came up, Archbishop Yakavos. For every person that thought that was a great idea when he walked with King, there were two that did not think it was a great idea.
At least.
That came up in a great talk with Archbishop Savas and the rest. There were at least two that thought that was horrid. Yeah. And some thought it was great. in the end, what are we doing? We're talking about him, and he's captured for saying, I went down here because I recognized a set of people being treated a certain way, and that resonated with me from where I came from.
That's right.
That is all he did. All the rest is what we did to him. And so in the end, being prophetic, count on somebody throwing a rock. If they don't, you're not saying anything worth listening to.
Yeah.
And so that's terrible. But I'm just saying, look,
You're exactly right.
What? Christ went to the cross, for crying out loud. Where do you think we carry one too? And somebody's going to give you one the minute you say something. I think this is wrong. You know what? I think you're wrong. So once you're ready for that, then I think we get to back what Father Chris is talking about. What level of faith do we have? And has it reached the level of saying, is there something I can do with the faith? No matter if it's a mustard seed, it's a mustard seed, that's fine. But if you can operate from that, or you think it's even bigger, I don't care what size it is, you got to operate from it. And you're going to get some heat either way. But you're not worried about that.
It's also, I think it's also a matter of time.
Yeah.
We live in a society that wants to take a pill in order to get rid of a headache. I understand that. And we take pills for everything. I mean, if you watch television, especially if you watch the news, there's like 50 different ads about ailments and side effects of those ailments, but we still take the pill because we want things to pass quickly. And this work of Christ is lifelong. This takes time, this takes sweat, this takes tears. And if we're not willing to do it, then you're right, Father Martin. Then what happens when we go to the judgment seat and we read in the book of Revelation, chapter 20, verse 11, and the books will open and everything about our lives will be exposed. I mean, what are we going to answer? What are we going to say? I'm sorry, I was busy. I'm sorry, I was online shopping at the time. You know, there has to be something more prophetic to all of this. I want to thank both of you, George and Father Martin, for your time. I want to thank our guests for being here tonight. And of course, to thank all of you who took the time to be here. The link to the program will be at the side. It will be on our website as well. I'll read again the Politikion, the prayer, the festal hymn of the day, and then we'll just have a couple of closing comments. Your birth, O Christ, dawned the light of knowledge upon this earth. And for by your birth, those who adored stars were taught by a star to worship you, the Son of Justice, and to know you, orient from on high. O Lord, glory be unto you. Eleni, I know we have Christmas is next week, and actually Thursday, which is our night for Let's Talk Live, is the next time we're going to do things. But we have a whole slew of programs that we're going to bring you next week, and I want to go over those with Eleni. First, we're going to move Let's Talk Live Thursday night will be now Tuesday night, so that we'll miss it by 2 days. And we've asked a very special guest, Presbytera Evgenia Konstantinou, PhD, an expert in New Testament theology, New Testament biblical studies. Here's the title of her program. What is the real story behind the Christmas narrative so familiar to us? Are Christians actually worshiping a pagan God when they celebrate Christmas? Does it matter whether or not Jesus was actually born on December 25th? Only two evangelists, Matthew and Luke, describe the birth of Christ, and their accounts seem to be different. Can we trust the Gospels? You don't want to miss that one. Tuesday night, 7 o'clock. There's also a few other items. Eleni, I don't know if you want to do them or you want me to say them.
Sure, I can go over them, Father Chris.
Okay, please.
I also wanted to add that for those of you that aren't able to attend church, we have a pan-Orthodox approach to resources that are also on the website where you can go to a different church and worship together from home as well. We have the Children's Word that is up already for this week. That's from Presbytera Alexandria Hawk. That's already up on the site. And there's multiple audio programs that will come out as well over the next week that we'll send out through email. So if you're not signed up for our newsletter as well, that's going to be something that you want to visit the website to do. It's great to see so many familiar faces. And I think that's it, Father Chris.
Okay, I know. I just want to mention the some of those programs. Christmas Without Christ with Father John McGuckin. Does God really have to be a baby? That's with myself and Father Vasily Tudora. And then we have a special program recorded out of the Holy Resurrection Church in Brookville, New York. That's on Long Island, with Father Pandalimon and Father Aristides. Lots to choose from next week, but remember that Tuesday night program as well. A special thank you to those of you who are here this evening. Thank you to those who have given to our 25th anniversary campaign. As I mentioned to you, we're 90% there. We're almost at our goal. So if you haven't done so yet, any amount will be helpful. Please do so. And of course, tell your friends. Thanks to our special guests and to all of you for joining us from around the world. Stay safe. Keep faith alive in you and in your home. Remember, though, to always have faith in what you listen to and what you watch. Please support MyOCN, which is the wind in the wings of the angels that carries the message of peace and love to the world. God bless you. Thanks for being here.